One of the things that daunted me about this evening is, why should we be talking about Palestine today rather than yesterday or tomorrow or whatever? And, as we're a journalistic club, we have to think about a peg. And for me, the only peg at the moment is how the international community has made Tony Blair the representative of the quartet. Now, is this something that they think will somehow help, or is it something that, in the end, they just think is another insult to the Middle East? I mean, you can look at it both ways. And as I'm the chairman, I obviously don't have a view, but I think that's the only way of getting into it today. We have with us a tremendously, I think, interesting panel. I'm going to go from left to right. I hope nobody reads anything into that. Jonathan Freedland is an old friend and colleague, a distinguished commentator from The Guardian and Evening Standard, and has an output which I'm absolutely appalled by. I don't know how he does it.
Appalled by?
No, I mean, how do you do this?
It is appalling. I agree.
How do you do that?
Appalling. I'm appalled as well.
Samir is a novelist, a writer from Rashidiyah, which I know quite well, having been down there quite a lot. It's a Palestinian refugee camp near the town of Tyre. On my other hand, I have...
You forgot my name.
Hussein Agha.
No, I haven't forgotten his name. I'm just trying to think how you describe him.
It's very different.
Because...
Human being, try.
No, because he was, he's somebody who I think has written some of the most brilliant stuff about the Palestinian-Israeli problem in the last 10 years. And he's been concerned with it for a long time. Hassan is a Lebanese, but he's been closely concerned with Palestinian events. He was an advisor to, at the Camp David talks in 2000, where things obviously shifted elementally, and he was there right in the middle of it. And he's written some of the most absolutely, I think, fundamental articles for the New York Review of Books with Robert Malley, who was there with you, which get, let's say, it's about as close as you can get to the middle of it. And Azan Tamimi needs no introduction, as we say. He's been there all the time.
Not all the time. I was born sometime.
and he's, Azam Tamimi is an absolutely creative, if I may say so, commentator, coming from a point of view which everybody has to come from at some stage. And I saw you, when I was in Beirut, I saw you doing this talkback thing with Jonathan Charles. Anyway, it's absolutely magnificent that the BBC should be having somebody on like him, telling it like it was. If I may say so, he's a if I may say so, Islamist, basically Islamist, propositionist, I think is the right way of putting it. He puts their case.
Proposition.
Yeah. And well, let's put it this way: he understands why Hamas exists. And if I may make one more statement before we open the panel, I just spent the last year in Lebanon, and if you go to the Dahir, you understand why all the Lebanese respect Hezbollah. Now, a lot of them hate it.
Not all of them, no.
Not all of them, but why it exists and why it survives. So that's maybe one or two things we can talk about. The other thing we may have to talk about is what is going on in that area, rather than just in Palestine. So, who should we kick off with?
I think Hussein was keen to kick off.
Hussein's going to kick off, being a guy who is very close to that.
Yeah, but it's
I don't understand this thing about is international community. What is the international community? It's not very clear to me in this context. We mean the active. You want me to hold this?
Yes, probably.
Yeah, the few can't hear.
The international community is the quartet, and the quartet is United States.
This is what we want to talk about, yeah.
So we have to talk really about the United States and the small orbit around it of Europe and the occasional in and out of Russia, and the United Nations to put its imprimatur on whatever is decided on. So, you know, let's be clear, when we talk about the role of the international community, we essentially mean the role of the United States. Two things distinguish the role of the United States, the combination of which these two things create a very dangerous and explosive situation. One is ignorance, and the other is arrogance. Put them together, and you have the U.S. policy in the region. On a very, very basic level of technical knowledge, the people involved in formulating and carrying out the policy of the United States on this issue are profoundly ignorant of the constituents and the parameters and the variables that make up the picture and the way it develops. And this is, to my mind, one reason for that is laziness. I don't think they give it sufficient time and effort to find out what's it all about. And by the time they start learning about really what makes things tick, they're usually out of office. A very good example is Ms. Rice, who every time appears on television speaking on this, reminds me very much of a sophomore student, sophomore being the second year at university, having written a term paper, as the Americans call it, on this subject, and she's trying to explain it to her audience. It is that basic, the lack of understanding. Now, they have accumulated over the years a lot of facts, but they just don't understand them. And one demonstration of this is for anyone who wants to read Dennis Ross's book. You will find out there's so much facts, but there isn't not even one iota of understanding. He recites stories and meetings and names and dates and who said what. And when you go through it all, if you're not involved, you do not know at all what has happened. You have all the details, but you don't have the understanding of it. Now, arrogance, the other side of the picture, is that the arrogance itself makes those people think that they know. This is one. Second, not only they know what the issues are, they know what is the best way of dealing with them. And anybody who, including the natives, if they have ideas of their own, they have to sit and listen, despite the fact that people like Mr. Blair says, I'm there now to listen, but he does not listen, because he knows best what should be done here and what is good for everybody. Not only good for himself, but for everybody. And if people do not listen, then there is something wrong. We have to work very hard on making them listen. And this is why the role of the international community, read for that, the United States, has always been very unproductive. The highest stage of arrogance I can think of immediately now is the actual appointment of Mr. Blair. Mr. Blair, who's been partly responsible for the destruction and the near death of an ancient people and an ancient civilization, is coming to the region to tell people how to build up peace and how to make up amongst themselves, without any consideration of the feelings of the people of the region. So you have to take it, whether you like it or not. Now, this might not seem to be a big thing, but this is the kind of thing that creates the kind of festering emotions in people that explode later in ways that are almost apolitical. By that I mean things like 9/11. When people cannot express their frustration about being put in a position where somebody is trying to resolve their problems despite the fact that they have no respect or no appreciation of his role, it creates the kind of feelings that in time provides them with the frame of mind that makes it possible to undertake certain activities that are really an explosion of their inability to be active participants in making up their future. I want to stop.
I just want to interrupt you there because I'm quite impressed that you feel that strongly, because you know you've been a mediator, you've been an insider, dealing with people like Clinton and Robert Malley and Barack. I'd like to ask Jonathan, if I may, would you like to come back on that?
Sure. Thank you. I agree with very much Hussein Agha's description of the combination of arrogance and ignorance. I only don't want us to let ourselves off the hook, ourselves meaning Britain, too easily, because I think the definition that Hussein offered of the international community, that is to say the United States, is too easy. The current strategy being adopted by the United States is entirely backed by the European Union, of which Britain is a lead part, and Russia is not in any way dissenting. The United Nations, as you imply, is rubber stamping it. And we're all in this together, in a way. And it's a bit too easy and Lord knows we want to, demonize the Bush administration and wish it was only them. The truth is we're up to our necks in this strategy ourselves, and therefore can't put ourselves wholly distant from it. This is what I wanted to sort of engage with, where, in a way, building on what Hussein has said, where has this background led us to? What is the strategy, if that's what it is, being pursued by the international community? And I think it's pretty clear after the Hamas takeover of Gaza, the idea is that there will be a demonstration exercise for the Palestinian people, with the Palestinian people in the role of pupil and the international community in the role of teacher. And the lesson that will be taught is that moderation in the form of backing Fatah pays, and extremism, adherence to Hamas, fails. That's the demonstration exercise. That's the model. Israel believes that. That's the Israeli policy. And you can describe it in the most extreme terms. As I once did in a conversation, I more or less for shorthand said, so you mean the idea is Hamastan will descend into complete misery and abject failure, and the people of Gaza will say to themselves, well, we can't have this, while meanwhile Fatahland flowers and is lavished with goodies from the international community, and the inhabitants of the West Bank say, well, this is obviously the way. And I expected him, as often happens with interviewees, to question my terms and say, well, I wouldn't put it like that. Instead, he said, that's exactly the strategy that we've got. That's exactly it. You've described it. So that's the position. Now, I think there's probably going to be a consensus on this panel for different reasons that that is a bad strategy. For my own part, it just seems obvious to me that in any future peace arrangement, I'm very informed in this by following the Northern Ireland process for 10 years, in any peace arrangement, you have to include everybody. Inclusivity was the watchword of the British approach. That meant, and Irish approach, hardliners, extremists, whatever term you want to use, have to be at the table, otherwise no peace accord holds. I think there's also no precedent I can think of in the world for any group of people who are ground down and suffering to therefore become more moderate as a result. I don't know of any case where people, because they are in misery and hunger and starvation, say therefore we'll be less radical, less extreme than we were before. I just can't think of a precedent. I also think just pragmatically, if your object is to somehow disenchant the Palestinian people of Hamas, in other words, make them like them less, you do not do it by allowing Hamas, and maybe Dr. Tamimi will want to come back on this, continue to look clean and have the sort of stature of being isolated and therefore somehow on the moral high ground. So again, I think that's just pragmatically inept. And also I just think the lesson again from Northern Ireland is if people reject or one representative movement fails, they do not go to a more moderate one, they instead go to one more extreme. And my tremendous fear...
And this is why I'd like to cut it on.
Look, let me just finish the sentence. I was just going to say my fear is that if Hamas and their are deemed to have failed, people will not move to Fatah, they could move to something worse, for example, Al-Qaeda.
Well, that's a point of view I'd like Salim to pick up, because Salim...
Who's Salim?
Samir.
Who's Salim? Oh, Samir, you mean?
Samir, sorry.
I thought you said Salim. I haven't changed my name.
Hello, who's that? I'll get you later.
Oh, that's your colleague.
Samir, this is David Sells. And we used to spend many nasty hours together down at Rashidia, where you come from.
You mean the Commodore Hotel?
No, Rashidia.
Yes, we have a Commodore Hotel there, yes.
Anyway, I'd like to ask you what you think about this as you know,
the international community.
As a Palestinian,
yes.
as a refugee from a place where
yes.
it is a living,
yes.
you know, reality at the moment. It's not just something that's got to be, you know, sorted out on the international scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hussein talked about, you know, the ignorance of the situation, and Jonathan, in a sense, sort of expanded on this point. And as Jonathan put it, you know, rather rightly, you know, correctly, we tend to sort of. I'm sure that we're going to agree with each other about this point, that the international community is just bad and rotten and useless when it comes to the matters of, you know, the Middle East in particular. Now, it's just, I mean, what is, if you want to have an, can you hear me? Yeah. Good. Not very well. The green one might work. Yes, is that right? Yes, that's better. Yeah, wonderful.
The Islamic one.
Yeah. The Saudi one. Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, to just sort of. I want to sort of, you know, bring in the point about ignorance. I mean, just it's not enough to say that they are ignorant. I mean, I wrote a piece a few weeks ago in which I said, you know, let Hamas govern. As simple as that. Hamas won the election, let them govern. And everybody was surprised. You, of all people, are saying that. You've been opposing Hamas and, you know, against Hamas and believe stand for sort of, you know, democratic left-wing secular politics. And suddenly you sort of all for Hamas to govern. Not exactly all for Hamas to govern, but, you know, the question, the issue here that I was basing my argument on is that this issue about the ignorance of the Middle East and the point about democracy in Gaza and democracy in Ramallah and democracy within something like Palestine, which does not exist in the first place, or Palestinian society. And it is this point about ignorance, about whether it is the most urgent issue, the most urgent matter is for Palestinians to pay a visit to the ballot books, or is there something else? For example, you know, the internal conflicts, internal division within Palestinian society, factionism, the struggle between different factions, the unbelievable, the inconceivable corruption of our leaders for the last 4 decades or so, for example. The need for reform for all these issues. Needless to mention, above all that, is the issue of the Palestine-Israel problem, which needs to be settled. I mean, you know, why on earth do you want to expose Gaza to this experiment of liberal democracy when there are so many issues involved here and need to be resolved before we start, you know, playing this game and playing this charade of democracy in this part of the world. There's so many issues involved here. And this is, I believe, what is, where ignorance becomes sort of obvious. For me as a Palestinian who, born in a refugee camp, lived within this society, and I understand what are the pressing issues there. It's not going to the ballot box and choose this or that person. Palestinians need reconciliation, especially in the last 20 years when Hamas decided not to join the PLO and to stay out of the PLO. And this was indeed a very dangerous decision by Hamas to stay out of, for their own reasons, and some of them are very good reasons actually. But it is an important issue, and it was bound to lead to this kind of confrontation and semi-civil war that we've been witnessing in Gaza. So I just want to sort of expand on this point of ignorance. That's all.
Okay. Azam, could you speak to that?
Thank you.
Yes. I know Azam is, very knowledgeable about how these things.
Let me begin with this combination of ignorance and arrogance. I think it explains partly what's going on, not totally, because it would risk, such an explanation would risk the assumption that the world community is somehow innocent, that they are stupid or they are ignorant. But I don't think they are innocent. I think policymakers are not innocent. But if I may, I think they are in a real predicament. Until perhaps the end of the 80s, there was in the international community some sort of certainty that Israel is there to remain. I think since the Intifada started in 1987, the foundations of this assumption have been shaken, and they continue to be shaken rather strongly. Now, as John Simpson said when he was reporting on the 50th anniversary of Israel in 1998, there were many special programs, some of you probably remember, and in one of these BBC programs, he ended by saying, now we see Israel celebrate its 50th anniversary. I'm not sure it will celebrate the 100th anniversary. I'm not sure it will be there to celebrate, something like this. See, the very existence of the Palestinians, the insistence of the Palestinians on resisting, on demanding their rights, is a signal that Israel is a short-term project. And I think on top of the minds of policymakers, that's a real headache. That's a real predicament. And that's why, if you think of why 2006 is the most, is the year of the highest number of missed opportunities. Since Hamas won in the elections of January 2006 and onwards, there were numerous occasions where some sort of a settlement could have been reached. Not to mention the previous occasions since 1993, since Oslo. But especially since Hamas won in the election of 2006, and Hamas was prepared to sign a long-term truce or ceasefire agreement with Israel that might last for a generation or more or less. But nevertheless, the decision, the policy, the approach, and the strategy has been to destroy Hamas, to make it impossible for Hamas to be a party to any political setting. And rather than destroy Hamas, as you've seen, Hamas has managed to take over Gaza, and sometime soon in the future it will take over the West Bank.
Is that the promise?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the thing that intrigues me about all this, is that if you look at the way the Middle East has gone since 2000, since Camp David, which Hussein was very closely involved in, it does seem to be the fact that outside powers have made the thing more and more impossible. They're not intervening as a helpful outside force. They are coming in as a powerful force in behalf of the Israelis. Could I ask Jonathan to say whether that's...
Three issues here. the role of the international community, the role of the so-called international community that includes Europe, although if you talk to the Europeans individually, they are all very skeptical, with the exception of the UK. They are very skeptical of the American position, but they say, you know, we cannot now pick up a fight with the Americans on this, and the Americans are the only people who the Israelis listen to, so we have to play the tune, we have to go along with the Americans. Right, the international community is...
it's a busted flesh.
The kind of politics it has involved itself in is ceremonial politics. It's the politics of declarations, of conferences, of documents to be signed, of meetings, of summits, of eternal visits by smiling diplomats. Monsieur Javier Solana, my God, he smiles so much, and he laughs, and he pats all the leaders on the backs, and he's so happy. Before him, Senor Moratinos, the American emissaries who came, they all are interested in having meetings and talking. So that's one thing. The kind of politics they're involved in is ceremonial. Second, once they go out of the ceremonies, it's money. Whatever we cannot achieve through persuasion or through actually dealing politically with the issue, we can throw money at. Whether it's extremism, we throw money at, it'll be solved. You know, there were all those plans for Gaza. You know, if only the Gazans have a viable economy, then they will all be sitting home in the evenings watching their television rather than going around throwing Qassams at Sderot and the Negev. Or the other part of the money is that if you don't behave, we will not help you. So you have to starve.
Which is what's happening now.
Which is more or less what's happening now.
It's more or less a blackmail.
So that's first ceremonial. Second, money, and third is they're actively involved in local politics rather than in the politics of bringing the two sides together. They spent so much time. I remember at the time when Barak was running against Netanyahu, the Americans' nightmare was that if Netanyahu was going to win. And they were devising all their policies along the line of how do we make sure that Barak wins. Clinton and Camp David at the very end, the reason he came out and he broke a promise he made to Arafat, the promise was that I will not going to point the finger at anybody and say you are responsible for the failure. And he did. And he did that. His explanation was that if I don't do that, Barak will not survive and we'll have Sharon to deal with. And that's impossible. Now what they're doing on the Palestinian side...
But he didn't have Sharon to deal with.
Well, of course, that was after, yeah. And then on the Palestinian side now, they spend all their time building up the so-called moderates, helping Abu Mazen. What does the helping Abu Mazen mean? Strengthening Abu Mazen. Every single time they say, we want to strengthen Abu Mazen, they weaken him. Every single time they say that. And when they strengthen him against who? Strengthening him against his own people, against the part of his people who he happens to not agree with, or they happen not to agree with him. So they involve all the time. You know,
Hussein,
am I going on a bit?
No.
It's good stuff.
I think you made a point there, which is, you know, obviously very fundamental. But I'd like to ask you and some of our other commentators to comment on this, to go back to the more general question of, you know, if there is any way in which the international community, whatever you call it, whether it's America, Britain, the UN, or whatever, can help. You know, how do you get out of this? And you've been involved, and I'd like to ask Jonathan, you know, because it seems to me that... Well,
Salim.
Salim.
Do you want to say something to me?
No, you have to.
You know, something obviously quite, you know, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yes.
And I'm the chairman, so I have no point of view. Right?
No, don't be our guest. No problem. If you
Well,
want to say something.
Is that, you know, the putting of Tony Blair as the head of the quartet, with strong support from Condoleezza Rice and various, you know, is obviously, how can I put it diplomatically, to about 200 million Arabs, provocative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Well, no, I agree.
I have not finished the points I was trying to
finish the
make.
point. Yeah, go.
I mean, it's all right if you don't want to hear them because maybe.
No, but that's what I was. But I'm asking whether we can get it more.
Can I just put one more point? There are four ways to describe the nature of the politics. Ceremonial, depending on money in a very wicked way. What was the third one? Taking sides in local politics. And now they discovered a new thing. Arms and ammunitions and training. In the past, they did not used to. They used to help Israel, of course. But in locals with the other side, they never did that. Now, they're doing it in Iraq, they're doing it in Lebanon, and they're doing it in Palestine. And actually, the engine for any kind of...
Northern Iraq.
No, in Iraq as well. Really? In Iraq, they help one side against another side. They help Iraqis against each other. And if there is one engine for fomenting civil war now in those three countries, it's the policy of the so-called international community. Because if there were no training and arming of Fatah, then perhaps I think more sober minds would have really won the day in the conflict between Fatah and Hamas. If in Lebanon you don't have the backing that they present to the Senior government, then perhaps the chances of some kind of political compromise reached between the local parties would have been higher. So now the role they're playing is that whenever the two parts of the society, of which one part they do not agree with, are in conflict, they stop the other side from actually reaching some kind of compromise with that side that they don't like.
Yeah, but why?
In the case of Palestine, if Fatah wants to make a deal with Hamas, they get upset. In case of Lebanon, if the government of Senora moves towards some kind of accommodation with Hezbollah, again they stop it. No, you should not do that.
Good.
In the case of Iraq as well, if Maliki wants, I'll give it to him. If Maliki wants to accommodate the Sadrist, no, they don't like that. Sorry, I finished.
Good. I only wanted to come in to agree with you because I think what you've said is very important in questioning something, Azam, you said earlier. You're right, there's a pattern there, and that goes to illustrate, I think, that this cold shouldering of Hamas by the international community is not solely about serving Israel's interests. The West has its own interest, which is it is frightened of political Islam for its own reasons. It isn't solely that it's running Israel's agenda, its marginalization of Hamas. It is scared of Hamas because it doesn't want a voice for those it is fighting in its own countries, but also in its wider struggle with al-Qaeda. And that's exactly why what you're saying is right. It cannot allow Senora to open out to Hezbollah, not because it's just protecting Israel, but it cannot allow the legitimation of Islamist forces. And that's exactly why your point about Iraq is right too. There's in other words, there's a wider point here than just the whole of the international community, European Union included, lining up to back Israel. No, they are in what they consider a big struggle against political Islam, and they do not want it to be in any way legitimated. So I think that's important. I also want to pick up, Azam, your point that it was a year of lost opportunities, 2006, and I would agree with that, many lost opportunities. But we cannot entirely exempt Hamas from that itself. Everyone is culpable for missing opportunities, and Hamas has not done what, in the terms you were saying there, which was the possibility of some kind of peace deal was there, and yet it was squandered. I agree it was squandered, but Hamas did not act like an organization that was open to that kind of arrangement. If you look again, I always mention Northern Ireland because it's such a good example, you could see that the Republican movement, through its signals and hints, yes, that it was ready and it was open for business. I do not think Hamas has sent that message in the last 18 months. I think you can understand why. It's very hard to do that under occupation. I understand that. You can also say that there's a struggle going on within that movement, and I think we can see that. And I think from what I can see, I think you're on the right side of that struggle from what I know of what you're doing. But there are ways to signal to the rest of the world that you are open. And I don't think Hamas has done that, because I think every time a message comes out that can suggest that direction, it's immediately somehow or other pulled back.
I think we should now talk to Azam.
Yeah. I also got a very optimistic thing to say, but I'll come back to it later.
No, but I think
Yeah,
Hasan,
you should come back to that.
You should speak to that, because I think it's a very important point you've made.
I think the world was not waiting for signals from Hamas. The world wanted concessions from Hamas. That's the problem. You see, in Northern Ireland, the British had been talking to the IRA discreetly for many years.
True.
So it was a very long process. Now, when did the West agree to speak to Yasser Arafat, for instance? Only when he made the concessions they asked of him. That's the problem. I mean, I assure you that if the West is willing to repeat the experience of Northern Ireland in Palestine, Hamas would be most willing. That's the challenge for the West. And I've read...
The challenge for Hamas too.
Hamas, as early as April 1994, came up with a formula that would make it possible for the world community to reach some form of a settlement without imposing a concession, a major concession on the Palestinians. You see, the world must understand that I, as a Palestinian, can never recognize the legitimacy of the State of Israel. Never, ever, never. Not if you cut me into pieces. Not if you do to me whatever you do. Because simply, I cannot recognize what is illegitimate as legitimate. It is my mother's house, it's my father's land. But if bloody Israel wants to live next to us, it can only be done through a negotiated long-term truce agreement. That's the bottom line for Hamas. Is the world willing to accept this? If they are willing to accept this, you can get something tomorrow. See? But unfortunately, look at the conditions of the quartet. Most humiliating for the Palestinians. First, recognize that Israel has the right to exist. Bloody hell, we'll never do that. Second, you have to accept all the agreements that the PLO, under pressure from the world, agreed to sign with Israel. And they are all agreements that are humiliating and that undermine Palestinian existence, let alone Palestinian basic rights. Thirdly, you have to renounce violence.
Excuse me, before you start the speech now, you're talking about human rights and recognition. You're talking about humiliation.
Well, I'll just say the last sentence.
Excuse me. This is an insult to everybody sitting here. If you do not respect somebody's right to exist, you do not. How do you talk about humiliation when you don't want to recognize 5 or 6 million people right to exist? Yes, everybody has the right to exist. Everybody has the right to exist everywhere within a certain political agreement.
You make your speech.
I don't. You're the one who started the speeches, not me.
Go make them.
It's unbelievable. These people talking about this is what gets me really. I mean, for a long time now, I'm so angry with everything is happening with the international community and everything, and then these guys coming back and talking about human rights, which. You don't even know the meaning of the word human rights, excuse me to say so, really. I mean, when you just in 1 second, you're denying the right of 5 million people to exist. 5 million people whose parents, whose ancestors want to throw the the 5 million Jews who live in Israel, who are you preventing? You are preventing the right to exist. I don't know, you're stupid, not me. You're so stupid. You are saying you do not recognize the right to exist. And at the same time talking about human rights. Don't talk about human rights. Say whatever you like, but don't talk about human rights at the same time.
I think we want to, slightly calm it down if we can. And it's a question of, if I can.
Microphone.
Samir, I was out.
Salim.
I know, I'm always getting that. I'm getting everybody's names right.
Samir is right.
But I was out with an old friend of mine the other night, London Jewish bloke called Leon Kreitzman, and we had a long talk. Hero Shaughnessy was with us, and at the end of it he said, well, the Palestinians got unlucky. And I said, well, that wasn't their fault. They have a right to stop being unlucky. They have a right to get back what's theirs. And that's why I agree totally with what you're saying. That the Palestinians...
I think I've been misrepresented by what Samir said, if I may. You see, we're talking here about a state, not the people.
What's the difference?
Please, if you let me continue, and then you have your say afterwards. The Jews, as people, as followers of Judaism, if they want to call themselves a race, if they want to call themselves a nation, have always had a place in the Muslim world. Always. There was no problem, never with them. Even when they were persecuted in Europe, it was in Muslim lands that they sought refuge. We're talking here about a political project that was the outcome of transformations in Europe, especially immediately after the First World War. We're talking about, continued after the Second World War, we're talking here about bringing Jews from elsewhere in the world to replace my people. That's what I don't recognize as legitimate. But if the Jews want to live with us, bring all the 15 or 16 or whatever 20 million Jews in the world. There is plenty of space in the Arab world, in the Muslim world. If they don't like Europe anymore, if they don't like America anymore, most welcome. You come and live with us. We share a lot in common. But for someone to live in my mother's house, in my father's land, and you want me to recognize that as legitimate, that's a crime. I'll never recognize as legitimate.
And it wouldn't be allowed anywhere in Europe.
Yes.
Let me just say one point here. Look,
I'm going to hand it
when we talk about
stop pontificating and
have the audience
and open up the floor because if I may, can I ask Ghada to stand up and say a few words? Ghada Kami is to me one of the people who's revealed the Palestinian experience in a very sort of proper way, as being as being British and Palestinian, and she's communicated with everybody. And she's just published a book which I think is here called. Your book is called Married to Another Man. Now you must tell us about the title because I think it's quite revealing.
No, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Sadly, the Frontline Club did not allow for me to bring copies of the book so that you can all buy it and be enlightened by it. Nevertheless, I'm very glad to be here and to be able to say something. In a way, I don't know what I can add to the eloquence on this platform, because it's very interesting that a lot of the points that have been made are ones that are valid, are interesting, important, and that I think we would all recognize as being highly relevant to what's happening today. I regret slightly that there has been apparently a disagreement on the platform between two Palestinians. That I do regret very much, but I'm sure it's not very serious.
Wouldn't be the first time.
I would disagree with him. He knows that.
I think actually, I mean, obviously I don't want to deal with points that have already been dealt with very ably. I suppose really what I want to do is to step back a little bit and say that I really agree with Azam Tamimi that the problem that we're facing here, however, whatever its ramifications, whatever the twists are that we are currently seeing, actually behind it all there is a reality, and it's a reality that the international community, and particularly the West, does not want to deal with, and that is that Israel was created in a way which inevitably antagonized the people of the region. It inevitably led to hostility, friction, war, and conflict. It was completely predictable. So the problem that the West faces is what do you do, having created this thing which the people of the region didn't want and don't want, and are showing their opposition to in different ways. And the growth of political Islam, by the way, is not a separate issue. And I think Jonathan is absolutely right to talk about Western fear of political Islam, but it is not separate from the issue of the creation of Israel. It's one of the changes that the region underwent because of the creation of a Western outpost supported consistently by Western powers that exploited the region. These two events are not unconnected. Therefore, if we want to trace this problem right back, we have to get back to Israel, its existence in the region, and what to do about it. So if anybody is interested in pursuing this point, you should really look at my book, which is available from all good bookshops.
Have we got, I don't know how much time we got left.
Do you have a long?
40 minutes?
Yeah.
Wow, but I think Ghada's introduced us into an area which we may well have to address, which will have to be addressed.
If you want a non-Palestinian Israeli voice, there's a gentleman there with his hand up.
Well, for change.
Over there.
Well, is where the...
You may want to. You may pick whoever you like. You just may feel that we haven't heard that voice. You may want to hear that voice.
No, I do. Well, cool. Of course we do. I know this panel. This panel is.
Yes, go on.
Fire away, Jude.
Hussein, I was really interested in your take on the role of the international mediator. I'm just wondering what your assessment of James Wolfenson is. I'd like to hear where you think he failed and why you think he failed. He himself uses the word failure in talking about himself.
Good question.
James Wolfenson was trying to do something that was essentially political in a technical way, and he could not done it. He could not have done it, and he came to realize that early on, but he wanted to keep on persisting in trying to do it. He wanted to carry out the kind of economic policies that will need, by their very nature, the political context for them to work. And he could not get that political context. He was very, very disappointed. I saw him just after the elections of Hamas here in London, and he thought that we should find a way of engaging Hamas and dealing with it, otherwise it will not work, especially in Gaza, which is a part where he put his own money trying to sponsor projects. But he said, if I manage to convince the Israelis, I cannot convince the people in Washington. So he was trying to do something that appeared to be neutral, that can be done under the guise of economics, but there's no such thing. You need the political environment for that to happen, and he could not get the right political environment. I think if you ask him, that is essentially what he did.
He maintains that Elliot Abrams consistently Sorry. What's that? Okay, he maintains that Elliot Abrams back in Washington consistently left-footed him, that sought to trip him up. I mean, do you agree with that? I mean, do you think Washington basically was opposed to what Wolfenson was sent out there to do, even though they sent him? And was he on a fool's mission?
Well, Washington does not like anybody to carry out substantial changes on the ground there unless it is done by themselves. And I think the early days of Mr. Blair are an indication that that might be the case again. It's true what you're saying. He always used to say that if they leave me with Bush, I can convince him. But the people around him did not give me a chance to do that. And whenever I convince them, they reverse it afterwards, because I can't be with them, obviously, all the time, and they are with him all the time. This was very, very frustrating for him. He came with the best of intentions, with a lot of resources and good ideas, but he could not carry them out. And whether it's Elliot or someone else, they definitely did not help.
But could I just ask? Could I try and draw this back, to the centre again, because I think we can get into lots of difficult propositions here. The peg has been, and I'd like to to hear more from Jonathan on this, and from everybody else, is if you make Tony Blair the head of the quartet, what are you saying to the people of the Middle East? Not just the Arabs. What are you saying to the Israelis? What are you saying about your way of dealing with the Middle East? And it seems to me, that it's a fairly arrogant way of behaving, because this guy, whether he believed what he did was right or believed what he did was wrong, he actually has created or helped to create or been part of the creation of enormous death and chaos in a part of the Middle East which is, you know, the Arab heartland. Now, how do you send somebody like that? I'm asking a question, not making a statement. How do you do that, and who does it, and why? Has anybody got an answer to that?
Mariana, got to answer?
There's lots of people here who want to. Maybe take 3 or 4 from them here so everyone has a go.
Good evening. I've got a question which also includes the diaspora and the refugees, which is, you talked about the expression of their frustration. In 1948 and 1967, millions of people were driven out. I see them also as voters were driven out as well. From what I can find out, there's about 5 million people, refugees around the world. And if there were an election was set up, and they can trace their ancestry to the Knesset area, if there was an election set up, it's called out-of-country voting, where they could vote and the world could see that something like 2-3 million people voted in the area, then the world could say, well, which one of these governments is actually legitimate?
Well, I think that's a very important point, actually.
And in Afghanistan, 5 million refugees returned, and 850,000 were allowed to vote using the out-of-country process, and to go in polling booths around the world. Now, I'm working on this process, and I'm contacting people. Are any of you people here, do you know people who I can contact to get the process going? You know, because, you know, I'm trying to get emails and phone numbers for the refugee camps, and I've contacted the people who do this.
Well, it's a good, it is a good point. I mean,
we'll get to,
Tell them afterwards. Yeah, afterwards,
one has to realize
there must be lots of people who know.
Yeah, but that is contrary to parts of the Oslo Agreement. The diaspora is just not part of this process that participates in the elections, and one has to remember that elections were set up under the Oslo framework. But the point that I wanted to make to
Salim.
I don't know. Is it Salim or is it Samir? But to yourself, before you bite my head off, there's a major difference between recognizing the legitimacy of the existence of the state of Israel, that's one statement, and recognizing the human rights of Israelis. Those are completely two different, diametrically, not necessarily going in the same direction. And there was a long discussion, rightly so, and surprisingly, in the U.S. that started in the U.S. Pointing out to the difference that for very obvious reasons, no Palestinian leadership can actually recognize the legitimacy of the state of Israel, because that equates to recognizing the legitimacy of everything else that happened to the Palestinians, which, by the way, is contrary to Folk Geneva Convention, the acquisition of land by war, etc., etc. All that one has to recognize if you want to recognize the legitimacy of something called the State of Israel, which so far nobody knows even the borders that state has. So that's a very fundamental point. For the time being, I have a problem in seeing where do we stand for the next 2 years, say, insofar as the Arab-Israeli conflict, and that's a question. The Americans are completely out of the game at the moment because Iraq, Iran is so far more important on the radar screen than bloody Palestine is. The question that I have is, where do the Palestinians stand? Because at the moment the problem is an inter-Palestinian issue. It's not an international community anymore. It's not an Arab Palestinian issue anymore. Abu Mazen has not been seen by the Saudis, nor are they extending a welcoming reception for him these days. So where do we go? And maybe if I can start with you, but certainly hear from Hamas. How does Hamas see in the next year at least? Where do we go, given all that?
Well, let me just answer the first point. I do not agree with you that there is between people and states. And within our modern age, people are being defined by nation states. There is no such thing as a kind of apolitical existence for all of us. We defined as Palestinians or British or whatever, by our own sort of national identity. So it's when I just simply talk about I will never recognize your state or your existence. It's one thing that I will never ever recognize your collective existence as a state. Is one thing. Is another to say I am willing to negotiate and let's see how to deal with the situation. We do have a very complicated problem. Let me just make it clear. I do not believe in any state based on religion or race or anything like that. You see, whether Jewish or Islamic or Christian or whatever, I am against any kind of a state based on religion, whatever it is, Judaism or Christianity or Islam or any other religion in the world. So I'm basically against the idea of somebody being a citizen according to his religion. This is simply absurd for me.
So you're against that for Israel as well?
But yes, but in terms of the historical context of Palestine, Israel, we must be sensitive. We're talking about Hussein raised the point about ignorance. Sometimes there is a lot of ignorance within Palestinian society itself, and there is a kind of too much sloganization and too much sort of all these hot air talk all the time, and no meaning and no substance and no correspondence to reality. We're talking about a situation where two nations, two groups of people, two people were stuck in this situation. How do we get out of it? This is, I understand, and I agree with it. I will be with Zam Tamimi if he says, I will never recognize a religious state. Yes, I agree with that. Of course he wouldn't, because he wants an Islamic state. So, but it's just the point here is that...
Well, they said they did.
Sorry?
They did say they didn't want to do that.
Who said that?
Not Azam Tamimi, but certainly the statements coming out.
All right, no problem. I'm glad to hear that. That's very good, very encouraging. My point here is that we cannot keep, we Palestinians, it saddens me that we Palestinians, we keep talking, we keep addressing the human, we talk, blaming the international community for its ignorance and arrogance, and we keep addressing the world and trying to address the world on the basis of human rights. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, we reveal another face which acknowledges nothing to do with human rights. We just must acknowledge there is a historical context for Palestine and Israel. And it's not only just this doom and this kind of alien power coming from another planet and set on Palestine and took our land and took our homes. Our homes and lands, yes, there were some of them taken by Israelis and Jews, but a lot of them, yes, a lot of them were sold as well, and a lot of them we were betrayed also by our own leaders, by our own communities, by our own backwards views and culture, which is still until now going on, and until Palestinians start sort of having a hard look at themselves and criticize some of their bases and ethos, we're still where we are now, fighting each other in the street of Gaza and killing each other in the street of Gaza.
Is there anybody on the floor who wants to address that issue about the idea that the Palestinians in some way sold themselves out? Or?
No, I'm not saying so. I'm saying that the responsibility is not only Israeli. It wasn't said. I did not say. Don't judge. I am saying that there is shortcomings within Palestinian society and Palestinian leadership, and it ought to be acknowledged. And it's not all the time. Every time something happened to us, somebody fails at school, it's the fault of Israel. No, it's not the fault of Israel. You failed in school because you didn't study. That's what happened. But some of us know everything happens in the world is the fault of Israel. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, there has been... There's been some discussion of a comparison between progress in Northern Ireland and the potential progress that there may be in this region. But, I think it's important to remember that the reason we have progress in Northern Ireland is because Republicans decided to accept the occupying tradition in response for a legitimate seat at the table and the sharing of power. And the majority of the people in the south of Ireland in the Republic voted to delete 2 articles from the Constitution laying historical claim to Northern Ireland in response for legitimate power sharing. And I think it's important to remember that when Irish people did that, they did not accept or agree with or forgive even the legacy of British colonialism in Ireland. They said, that is what's done, that is the past, let's try and build a framework for the future. And I think that in that context, it's important to think about, rejecting the existence of the State of Israel is probably not a starting point to anything positive happening in the region in the future. which is not to say, which is not to validate or agree with or accept anything that happened 50 years ago, but I think we have to focus on building two states that are reasonable states, that are viable states, successful states beside each other.
Can I just say one thing in answer to your statement? It seems rational from a British Isles point of view, but the existence of the State of Israel has been at the expense of another people. The Irish, however they didn't get along, were never kicked out of their homes. Maybe they were moved around, shoved around, abused.
Can I just respond to that? I mean,
but not in the same way that the Palestinians
it's actually completely comparable because,
in Iraq,
excuse me,
people died.
Excuse me.
That's more than the entire Israel-Palestinian conflict
Excuse
in
me.
one war. That's in 91.
Excuse me. To sum up the history of British colonialism in Ireland as Irish people not getting along is, I think, an example of the kind of logic and intellect that has been imposed on the country for many years. The truth is, over 1 million Irish people starved to death less than 100 years ago under British rule in Ireland. Irish people have long since moved beyond that. We figure we are neighbours now, and we must get along, and we must have a structure for the future. And I think it's also important for Palestinians to think about, how to build a political framework that is going to work for them and for Israelis.
I'm really grateful to you for that contribution. I think you've hit several nails on the head, and I also want to thank Samir for a lot of what he said. In a way, what you've said goes to something I'm thinking about quite a lot at the moment. There was a piece in a New York paper, The Forward, a Jewish newspaper, last month, which said "No to recognition" was the headline. And what it meant was we should get past this whole issue of demanding recognition from each other, both sides. We've seen even on this platform tonight what trouble you get into when you ask for, you need to recognize my right to exist, and you to recognize my right to return. We need to get past this, the recognition, this very neuralgic issue, as you've identified in Ireland, of trying to forgive and accept. Don't even ask the question, because it actually can only lead to people saying no and lack of progress. So instead, we just have to, in a way, park those very painful, emotional questions and say instead, what are the frameworks for how we're going to live in the future? It was in that context, and actually with Northern Ireland in my mind, that I said to Azam, we need to hear, give us a sign, almost, right? And the reason why what you said to me, Azam, was slightly discouraging was the sign you said was the Muslim world is open for Jews to come and live as they lived before. That was not such a comfortable experience, I've got to tell you, without going into all the history of it. You're right that Christendom treated Jews worse, but the sort of dimmy second-class status was no bowl of cherries either. And the idea of saying, in response to national aspirations, you can come back and live as a religious minority in our countries should strike the wrong note in your ear, just as it would if somebody said to you, and you're a nationalist, you can live as individual Muslim citizens of or residents of Jewish lands. No problem, live as a minority. You, of course, wouldn't accept that. It would be an affront to your dignity to be asked to park your national aspirations. So I'm saying really to you, in a way, as a Jew, you just have to accord to the other the same national aspirations that it would be, frankly, insulting to withhold from yourself. So it's not, that was what I was looking for, was some kind of clue that you understand that for the future these are going to have to be national entities that coexist with collective rights, and that's why I was grateful to what Samir for what he said. So you, in a way, when we and I shouldn't go back on this because we said we mustn't get into recognition, but it isn't helpful to say, look, I can't recognise the State of Israel, and I in a way understand that, and I wouldn't, if it was up to me, ask you to recognise it in the way that the quartet are. But you can't then say, but I recognise all these individuals, because the trouble is 99.9% of Jewish Israelis will say to you, if you recognise me my rights, one of my rights is I want to live in a state called Israel. Then what do? You've said you recognise them as people and you recognise their rights. That's what they want to do. They want to live collectively. Perhaps they're wrong. Perhaps it was a mistake. Perhaps it should never have happened. But that's where we are now. And I think we have to get past this needing sort of declarations of faith from each other's side and work out a way these two national collective entities can live with each other.
When I was speaking, I was actually talking why these opportunities were being missed. And I was trying to explain, or I was interrupted, that they were missed because the world community was seeking concessions and imposing preconditions. That's what I was trying to say. Now, if you think that it can lead to peace, for me as a Palestinian to say it is worth the price for the Polish family who came from Poland, the Jewish Polish family that is living in my mother's house, to just take that house and I'll forget about it, that can never happen. I won't do it. My children will not do it. I will teach them that their grandmother had a house in Beersheba. One day will come back. Okay? And there are millions of refugees in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, in the West Bank, in Gaza, who will tell you exactly the same thing. The Northern Ireland thing, I'm not an expert on Northern Ireland, but I have heard from people who were involved in the Northern Ireland process. Michael Ancram, Lord Aldersize, and several other people. And they all said, and Michael Ancram even wrote it recently, that it did not involve a precondition that the IRA should renounce their dream of one day having Ireland reunited. And this is all what I'm saying. Don't impose preconditions on the Palestinians when you want to negotiate a settlement with them. There can be nothing fairer than this. But part of the arrogance that Hussein referred to was that you come to us and say, you have first to accept these three conditions, and then we might consider talking to you. I said, go to hell, we don't want to talk to you. If you are going to impose conditions on me, I'm not going to talk to you.
Yeah, I get it.
But if you want to talk, we'll talk. So what? What's the deal? What's the big deal? We can talk. We can sit and we can find a way. Of course, that's the thing. See, now I regret that the whole position has been misrepresented. There will be Israel there. Israel does exist, does bloody exist, as I always say. It will exist for a while. I believe personally, I could be wrong, but I believe personally that it will not last for much longer. But that's my personal opinion. But in reality, we can reach a settlement based on a long-term ceasefire, a truce that can be renewed once the term is over, if we can negotiate a deal without preconditions.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to say something about that.
Well, that's about as eloquent as it gets, I think. Has anybody else got a
two people
contribution?
We started by posing the question of the role of the international community. And Mr. Blair has been sent to build a Palestinian democracy, as far as I can understand it. I seem to remember touring Palestine, going around Palestine, talking to many people in 1986, and the first word on everybody's lips was democracy. And everybody was saying, we will build a democratic Palestinian state which will be the fear of every other Arab state in the region, because our democracy will be a strong democracy. But you can't build democratic institutions, and you can't build what is also essential along with that, a strong economy, if it's continually being bombarded and destroyed. And can't it be part of the role of the international community to ensure that Israel and its those who support it, of course including the maybe primarily the United States, isn't there a role to ensure that they do not continually
destroy the building of democracy and the building of
I'm going to answer your question, I think, by asking, as in...
Should we hear from Hussein? We haven't heard from him before. Sorry, I'm just taking over. I want to hear what Hussein said.
Well, I mean...
Good.
I want to ask... I went to...
Hussein, no, with public demand.
There was asked a particular question about something I do know about. And I'd like to hear your comment. You know, we're talking about September 1993, after the Oslo Agreement. I went to Gaza. I went to Gaza.
Oh, your mic is...
For the BBC, sorry.
It's dropped. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
I went to Gaza, right after the agreement. And it became evident to me within 2 months after what had happened in September 1993, that the Israelis had absolutely no intention of dealing with the Palestinians on any proper commercial level. And in Gaza, it was I mean, do you have that?
Well, you see, the only reason Oslo was negotiated is that the Israelis wanted to get rid of the headache of the Intifada. That's why primarily it happened. And the Americans were in the mood for something like this because they wanted to pay back some of the Arabs who participated with them in liberating Kuwait. But for the Israelis, as far as the Israelis were concerned, that was the primary motivation. For the PLO, the primary motivation was the rise of Hamas. It was frightening for Fatah and for the PLO that Hamas, or that the Muslim Brotherhood of Palestine had transformed themselves into a movement which seemed to pull the rug from underneath Fatah, who had for at least a decade, for more than a decade, really, a decade and a half since the 10-point statement, or what they called memo, was declared, had been seeking a different approach to getting something better than nothing. And I think the whole concept of Oslo was finding a Palestinian partner who could solve Israel's problem, resolve Israel's predicament. Nothing to do with Palestinian rights, nothing to do with Palestinian nationhood or statehood or whatever you want to call it. Simply a Palestinian partner who seemed to benefit from this partnership.
Well, you could ask Hussein about that.
About what?
About that, what he just said. Is that
Do you agree with that?
Sorry, I did not follow that.
You fell asleep.
No, I was thinking about the forward. It's a pity it's not anymore in Yiddish, because it used to be a great publication when it came out in Yiddish.
You preferred reading it in the original Yiddish?
I preferred the whole the sense of language it had, and
they had one page,
and the times of Isaac Bashevis Singer and all that. It was the feelings are very emotive. But yes.
Can I ask Hussein a question? Hussein, while you've got the microphone.
I'm just the chairman.
While Hussein's got the microphone, I want to ask him a question. I'm going to use my time to ask you a question. Because you mentioned the forward, their point was to drop this whole need to hear the other side recognised and everything. But those three conditions the quartet have imposed, that Azam says are humiliating. Do you find those three conditions humiliating for you?
They are much more than humiliating. I find them exceptionally degrading, and it's one reflection of the arrogance, and it is really an excuse for not moving forward. Anybody who comes up with these conditions knows that these conditions are not fulfillable, because to fulfill them it means changing by decree the nature of a whole collective of people that is not going to change overnight by decree, by signing a paper. But what is more serious is that it is a recipe for impotence and not moving forward at all. It's an excuse. And anyway, the bottom line is that in politics you deal with people. You don't start by saying that unless you do this and this and this, I will not speak to you, as if you speak to me, you are rewarding me with something. You're speaking to me because you want something, and the only way to get it really is through speaking to me. So when you set those conditions, I think it was absurd, but I think the people who said them knew what they were doing. They just did not want to deal with Hamas, and the way to do it is not to appear to be negative. So you say, no, there is no problem, but you have to do this and this and this.
But even though you, in terms of Fatah and the substance of those conditions, you would have no problem with those, actually the substance. Fatah has already said it recognizes Israel, previous agreements.
Fatah never said it recognizes Israel.
And
PLO.
PLO is not Fatah.
Okay, well, the
that's a game.
That's a good game.
Fatah never said.
And anyway, was the dominant faction of PLO when it made
the reason I did not take part in this
PLO isn't the PA,
is I've been discussing this for 30 years, and it's not something that you can reach a conclusion on.
Arafat said it.
Arafat said what?
Arafat recognized the state of Israel.
Recognize, there's no problem. There's a difference between recognizing and recognizing the right to exist. And Arafat's way of dealing with it was through saying, recognizing the right of Israel to exist within secure borders. In his mind, he's saying that he recognizes the right to secure borders, does not recognize the right to exist as such. But I don't want to. I agree. I agree with the thing of the forward.
That sounds a bit like logic chopping.
Well, you take your
Of what? Arafat's logic chopping. He was a great chopper. And God knows we really miss him because through his chopping and maneuvering, at least he spared a lot of blood. You did not have the kind of scenes we saw recently in his time, and you could never have had them during his time, because for him, when people talk very lightly when they talk about red lines, but for him it was a very, very strict red line, and he spent all his life, really, that was the most important thing. And it's not just for him. Yes. For the Palestinians, the spilling of Palestinian blood is really very, very distasteful. It's not something that they enjoy. They do not take it lightly, and it's very, very unpopular. That's why the Mecca Agreement was so popular amongst Palestinians, because supposedly it was supposed to ensure that this will not take place. But what? Well, you were saying something, I forgot. The content of the conditions, I don't think, it's just the idea that you set conditions to talk to people.
Yes.
Hussein, I think are we running out of time?
Of steam.
Steam or time? I think you can never have a...
Closing remarks.
You can never have a decent discussion about the Middle East, can you? Because it always ends up in a terrible argument. I think this panel was essentially probably a little bit unbalanced, I may say so. We had me as chairman.
When a Palestinian is the leading Zionist on the panel, you know you've got something a bit wrong.
I didn't know. Well, we'll have to talk to you about that later. Well, we've had Hussein Agha's insights, which I've always found absolutely brilliant, and I'm quite surprised to find him being so forthright, because I've read his stuff in the New York Review of Books, and I've read what he's done with Robert Malley, and I know how long he's spent, being with diplomats and being with incredibly important American politicians and other politicians who are trying to work it out.
Basta,
No. And to hear him speak like this, is to me quite important. Azam Tamimi, I watch him on television all the time, and he's been a friend of mine and an advisor for many years. Samir, I don't know that well. I know that he comes from
Russia. We can
Russia.
get to know each other if you like.
He comes from Rashidia. He's obviously got a different opinion, which is another great thing. Jonathan is a great, mediating, I think, voice on the international stage, and he's very, very good on the Middle East. We're probably not going to get anywhere out of this, except that I would like to say, the international community, such as it is, whatever it is, may have to do something, because obviously the local people involved at the moment. I've just spent 6 weeks in Lebanon, and the whole place is going totally awry. It's, you know,
this is because of too much international community, not too little.
Yeah, all right. I give up. I give up. I give in. But it would be nice if we had an international community, perhaps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tough discussion.
As usual.